Hey there, I'm Heintzel, and welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy's video. Now, if you've been watching my videos or you've been subscribed for a while, you'll know I mostly do tutorial videos. I'm not big on the theories and stuff. However, I've been coming up with a lot of theories. I mean, I've had them, but I'm finally ready to, get them out there in video form. Before I do that, before I even get a timeline down, I need to establish which games and FNAF media are canon to the story. Now, you might not think this is that important, because there's not that many games, right? There's only, 12 games? Well, there's a lot of FNAF media, and the community is really controversial on what is canon and what's not canon. So today, using my opinions and a lot of facts, I'm going to be telling you what I believe is canon and not canon. Now, before we get into that actual part of the video, please let me know if I missed anything on this little list you can see right here. This is not in the order, by the way. We're going to be putting in the order. This is just all the media I have. But if I missed some sort of media, a books, series, or a game somehow, please let me know. And if you disagree with something I've said, for whatever reason, a fact I might have missed, please let me know in the comments, because I know there are people that know more about FNAF than I do. So please let me know. But without further ado, let's start off the list by getting in to the first three games. Okay, so the first three games, the trilogy, which is supposed to be the only three games, are very obviously canon. I mean, at least in my opinion, I think they are canon. So I think we can safely move FNAF 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to have to stack it here for a second. Just ignore that. You didn't see that. Yeah, we're gonna move that there. Maybe we can move some of these down. Get over here. Okay, perfect. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now these are now in our canon list, at least for now. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty I don't know. I don't think anyone is arguing for the fact that these three games are not canon. If there is a reason, let me know. I just think Scott has been clear that these are the canon games. Like, these are what everything is based off of. And I think with that, we can also put 4 in here, because again, that was also supposed to be the last game. And Sister Location. I know some people don't like Sister Location, and maybe they don't want it to be canon, but it is definitely a canon game. I definitely think it's canon to the story. And I feel like it'd be pretty hard to argue that it's not. Okay, so if we put those two in, now we have a few more to get to. And I'm going to just get straight to the point here. Security breach. Very obviously canon to the game. Now, a lot of people would wish it wasn't, but I would argue all of the modern games are based around security breach. And I think it's pretty clear. The whole story, after security breach, everything's been based around it. They had a whole book series based on it, what we're talking about as well. But yeah, I think very obviously security breach is canon, even though people don't want it to be. And with that, I think we can argue that its DLC, Ruin, is also canon. So yeah, I think that one's also pretty clear. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to get into the other Steelable games. We got Help Wanted. Again, it brings up some kind of weird continuity with Glitch Trap. I believe personally that Glitch Trap was originally meant to be Afton before becoming some Mimic amalgamation. We'll get into lore later. Again, that's a separate video. Just canon today. But I do believe Help Wanted and Help Wanted 2 are canon. So let's move those over here. And now we have a lot of the more interesting types of games over here. Now, Secret of the Mimic just released. And again, this is obviously part of the mainline games. So I think we can move that one over. Now we're at the real doozies here. The ones that people might argue are and are not canon. So I'm going to move some down here. I'm going to get some out of the way that I think are apparently obvious are not canon. Let's start with Into the Pit. Okay, so Into the Pit is a game about the missing child incident, okay? However, we have an agony, hallucination, or a time-traveling event, which just doesn't make sense with what we see here. You could argue it. I just do not believe that Into the Pit has anything to do with these games. They might give us hints, right, to how the MCI happened. I just don't believe there was a kid that went into a time-traveling ball pit or an agony-induced ball pit and then saw the MCI and came out. I just don't think it's happened. So I'm going to be putting it as our first non-canon game there. If you disagree, please let me know why. I'm very confident on that. I think most people are confident on that. It's based off of the book in Fazbear Frights, and therefore I just don't think it is. It's just not canon. It's canon to its own story, which most of the things are, but it can give us little, Easter eggs on how to solve the main story over here, but it can't give us one-for-one comparisons because it's not part of this canon story over here. Okay, so speaking of Fazbear Frights, I know this is the logo for the Haunt attraction in 3, but this is referring to the Fazbear Fright books. Again, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens in this, one being the time traveling ball pit. But if we use stories like, I believe it's called No Way Home, where Susie, the girl who possesses Chica, she gets lured by Afton, and we have no mention of a dog that is what lured her, and we have canon backgrounds that is what happened to Susie over here in the canon games. So I think we can, again, clarify that the Fazbear Fright books, shorts, whatever you want to call them, are not canon. And with that, I think the Dead by Daylight canonization is just not true. The Dead by Daylight is not canon to the story. I think the Glitch Trap skin proves that, because Glitch Trap himself in this game is not a virus. It's just a physical guy wearing a suit, which is not canon to the Help Wanted games. So let's put that over here. Perfect. Okay, let's move on to another pretty easy one. Again, I'm trying to get the easy ones out of the way here because it's just easy. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Everything we know about it is just not the same. There's no Mike Afton that we know of. Vanessa exists while the first Freddy's is still there. There's no Pizzaplex in sight, and we don't have anything to do with Glitch Trap, so it doesn't make sense. Again, it doesn't make sense with the modern story for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie to be canon to the main games. So we're going to keep that out of there and call it not canon. Again, that means canon in its own universe, right? We have the Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and 2 movies, which have their own canon. But again, this is all about the canon of the games, the main storyline, and it is not canon. All right, Tales of the Pizzaplex. Now, if you would have asked me this question before Secret of the Mimic, is this canon? I would have said possibly. I didn't want it to be, because I don't think books should be required to understand the game lore, but possibly. But after seeing the Mimic, its story about the Mimic, honestly just contradicts the stories in Tales of the Pizzaplex. I believe it's not canon. And you guys can argue with me on that if you want. I think it's pretty obvious it's not. Now, on to the Halloween edition. Now, this is in reference to the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 DLC right here. And it has a DLC that is the Halloween edition, which has Nightmare Own, which is arguably in the Steel Wool games. Nightmare Balloon Boy, which I believe at one point Scott said was canon, but the rest of it wasn't canon. I don't know if he still keeps those statements. I don't know if that really makes much sense. But maybe he's just arguing to the fact that 2 is the prequel, and that's why he was trying to hint at that with Balloon Boy. Anyways, I don't know. I don't think this is canon. I think he's literally mentioned that it's not canon, so we're going to put the Halloween edition right here in the uncanon section. Now, you might not be able to read this. It says The Silver Eyes, and that's in reference to the Silver Eyes trilogy, which is a bunch of books that directly go against the lore of the main games. That's all I need to say about it. It's almost guaranteed to be not canon, so I don't think we'll have many people arguing with me on that. Dreadbear, Curse of Dreadbear. Now this one's hard because is what we're seeing actually actual Fall Fest? Because I know several people that say, we haven't seen Fall Fest yet. However, you have to put into context that Help Wanted is a recreation of the games, right? It's a recreation by a game studio, an indie dev, reenacting the actual events of Five Nights at Freddy's. So in that vein, we could assume that he's doing the same thing here with Fall Fest, which is obviously a traumatic event. We know Fiona now and her death. So I'm going to put it over here in the canon games because I think it is just a canonization of the indie dev making a VR version of a real life event in the storyline. So yeah, I think I'll put that there. Okay, Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the racing game that I'm sure many of you forgot about. There's some cool stuff in there, like the little Easter egg to Secret of the Mimic we got before that. But I think it's pretty obvious that it's not canon. So, I mean, again, it is racing games. with these cartoon versions of the FNAF characters, so it doesn't make sense to be canon. You could argue maybe that it's a in-world game, like an actual arcade game within the canon universe, but in that sense, I'm saying the storyline of Five Nights at Freddy's is just not canon. Okay, I haven't been ignoring this, I just didn't see it somehow. Obviously, FNAF 6 is canon to the story. Some people might argue it was retconned out of the storyline because of Security Breach and how we know the Tangle and all that at the end. But I don't know. I think we see a FNAF 6 in the basement. I think it's definitely canon, and I would see it'd be a pretty hard argument to argue it's not. With that, we have Ultimate Custom Night. Now, this one might be divided. I've seen some people, they just don't think Ultimate Custom Night is a canon thing. It's just a fun game where you can, use all the characters in the first 6 FNAF games just to play along. However, it's likely canon. I wish there's parts of it. Honestly, let me be honest. I wish it wasn't canon because I just don't like the anime scenes in it. I don't think that's just not FNAF style. I don't like how there's not actual nights. I know there's like settings. Not my typical FNAF game. Not my favorite FNAF game. But is it canon? Likely canon, yes. This is likely Afton's eternal torment and probably his end because of the retcons or story rewrites for the future FNAF games. Alright, so now we're going to get into my very, very first controversial pick here. I'm guaranteeing it. Five Nights at Freddy's VR, also known as Special Delivery. I'm going to go right over here and put it in not canon. It's not canon. They removed this game from the App Store. I feel like there's no other way of Scott saying, hey, this isn't over here if you can't even get the game anymore. It also doesn't really make much sense that Fazbear Entertainment was sending animatronics to your house. Were they just walking there? Doesn't make sense. You get agony around Shadow Bonnie or XFQS, what do you want to call it? That just isn't how agony is portrayed in the rest of the games. Doesn't make sense. And I know it has a DLC as well. I just didn't want to count that as a separate thing. We were running out of space. So I'm putting both these over here as not canon. Feel free to argue with me in the comments. I just don't agree. Now, again, we're going to get into another controversial one here, and that is the Choose Your Own Adventure books. There's 3 of them. There's The Week Before. There's VIP. There's Return to the Pit. And I think there's a brand new one in the Pizzaplex. But I personally don't think these are canon. Now, again, I'm on the strong side that none of the other books we've seen so far have been canon, like the Fazbear Frights over here and the Tales of the Pizzaplex. So why would these be canon? There's direct contradictions to the story we see in The Week Before that we know just aren't true in FNAF 1. And I just don't think they're going to make you read books with multiple endings and multiple possibilities to be canon to the storyline. Again, feel free to give me reasons why you disagree. I just think the evidence points that these books aren't over here, and I just don't feel like we could use it as direct evidence. Now, indirect evidence, yes, maybe it's pointing towards an answer for these games, but what happens in these books, I can't say for a fact it's what happens in the games. Okay, over here we have the Ultimate Guide 2.0, you couldn't see it there, and that's just in reference to all the other books, like the Ultimate Guides, the FNAF cookbook, all of those things you want to call them. Again, I think it's pretty clear those aren't because we've seen several mistakes just with the editors in the Ultimate Guide and the guide before that. So, if there's lore mistakes, it's just probably not canon. Pretty obvious there. So we're going to put that there. Okay, so now we're on to our big 3. I mean, actually, I'm going to remove this one. I think that one's pretty obviously. I think Scott literally said the custom night of Sister Location isn't canon to the story. I think he directly said that, and I think he stuck to that. So we're going to put that right there. Now we're on to our last 2, which is FNAF World and the Security Logbook. Again, I'm probably going to get controversial opinions here, and maybe it's my opinions winning me, but we're going to start with FNAF World. Now, I've heard some people in videos, I've never seen this, mention Scott say, I regret putting this in the game's canon. I don't know if this was during the release, but I'd argue it's not. I argue it's not in the game's canon. And if it is, it's not impactful enough to be important that if it wasn't, it wouldn't change anything. Because basically all the arguments for FNAF World being in the canon is it's just the in-world universe of the mini games we see in these games and how they're all connected in their own little world. But to me, that's overcomplicated. I mean, don't get me wrong. FNAF's complicated. All this over here, very complicated. All this over here, very complicated. But it really overcomplicates the thing when you have, like, a whole separate world just for the video game world where spirits are interacting with each other. And I know it also ties into FNAF 4 and stuff like that with the crying child. But personally, I think it leads to hinting at answers for this game. But it itself is not canon. So we're going to put that right there. And finally, the security logbook. Most people you see are going to put that right here. There's a little space for it. However, I also see a space right here. Now, I agree. The security logbook was released after FNAF 6, right? So it was most likely released to give us answers. And I think we can take some of those answers and apply them to the games. I think that's correct. Like the names, right? With Dave or Evan Afton, all that stuff. Now, I don't think that's a bad interpretation. But again, none of the books I've seen so far give evidence to being canonized. And I think if Scott was going to change anything, a story redirect, he wouldn't look at this book and be like, oh, I said this in a book, so that means I have to stick to it in these games. And therefore, I'm going to have to put the security logbook, or survival logbook, whatever you want to call it, in the uncanonized games. So yeah, there we have it, guys. There is my actual not canon and canon list for FNAF. If you disagree, please let me know in the comments below, and I'm super excited to get into lore videos. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it wasn't too boring for you, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.